Hello, and thank you for joining the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing's live call-in show. Today's topic is the new Chicago Ordinance protecting tenants in foreclosed rental property ordinance. And my name is Patricia Frahn, Program Manager of the Tenants in Foreclosure Intervention Project. And I am joined today by Diane Lemus, who is a leader with the Albany Park Neighborhood Council. Hi, Diane. Thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Trish. Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, what I do at the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing is, again, I work in our Tenants in Foreclosure Intervention Project, and we address issues related to foreclosure that renters face. Diane, can you explain a little bit about what you do at the Albany Park Neighborhood Council, and also what is the Albany Park Neighborhood Council? And just before you do, I'm sorry, I want to remind everyone that this is a live call-in show. So if you have questions about this new Chicago ordinance or about general renter foreclosure issues, please call 312-738-1060. Thank you.
Yes, again, my name is Diane Lemus. I'm a volunteer and board president for the Albany Park Neighborhood Council. We're a grassroots community organization that works on issues like the preservation of affordable housing, immigration, healthcare, youth rights, and education. And we've been in existence for over 11 years.
Great. And just to remind people, Diane and I are not attorneys, although the show is with the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. Neither of us are lawyers. Okay, so I just wanted to briefly talk about some background information regarding foreclosure. And let me share with folks some of our data here. So Lawyers Committee for Better Housing has been tracking data on foreclosure filings since 2009. And I know I've shared this slide in a couple of weeks past one of our shows, but I think this is really important, and I really wanted to stress that this is a huge issue for renters in Chicago. So we've found that over the past 4 years, 20,279 apartment buildings have entered foreclosure, containing a total of 61,561 apartment units. This makes up about 11% of Chicago's total rental stock. And I just want to direct people to the map on the left here. That is a map of Chicago's foreclosure filings only on apartment buildings and only for the year 2012. So this is really a huge issue for renters. And I know a lot of times the foreclosure crisis is the discussion is really focused on homeowners, but it does impact renters as well. And LCBH has found that more rental units are impacted by foreclosure than homeowner units. So the need for this ordinance really was great. And Diane, I really think it would be great if you can talk a little bit about the background of the Keep Chicago Renting Coalition, which is how we've met. Mm-hmm. So why was it formed, and what was the purpose and goals of that coalition?
Sure. Like you just said, Trish, when the foreclosure crisis hit, the focus was mainly on single-family home ownership. And nobody was thinking about what renters were going through when the building they were living in went into foreclosure. So one day, one of our leaders that was working on health care came into the Albany Park Neighborhood Council's office with a notice in his hand. And the notice said that he was being evicted, and him and his family that lived in that apartment for over 20 years had to be out in 3 days. So it was at this point that we started paying attention to what renters went through when the building they were living in went into foreclosure. So the more we investigated, this was a 7-unit building, and no one in that building knew that building was in foreclosure. So then we start hearing about all the abuses that the banks or the servicers that they hire, what they do to the renters that live in these buildings, and most of these buildings become bank owned. Right. So we start hearing things that they would shut off the utilities, the hot water and the heat in the middle of winter, knowing that families with children were still in this building. They would come in the middle of the night and try to change locks. One of the servicers was boarding up the house when the tenant and his family was still living in it. So the abuses, the insults, the threats that the renters were going through when they were completely innocent victims. They were paying their rent. They were doing everything right. This was the start of us really paying attention to renters. And what we did, we called other grassroots organizations from across the city and found out that this wasn't only an area that we took care of. This was a citywide problem that was facing renters that, were living in these buildings that were foreclosed on. So it was at this point that the Keep Chicago Renting Coalition was formed. And the coalition was made up of grassroots organizations from all across the city, labor and policy people. And the purpose of coming together was to come up with some kind of legislation that would protect tenants that were living in these foreclosed properties and prevent more buildings from becoming vacant.
Right.
Because the banks just wanted to vacate the building, evict the tenants, and these properties would sit vacant for years and years.
Yeah, and LCBH was seeing a lot of the similar abuses, and that's how we collaborated to form this coalition. And we'll talk a little bit about what was the results of our coalition, what was the results of our efforts and the ordinance that went into effect recently. So this is going to be really exciting, but I know we do have a caller right now, so let's take the caller's question or comment. Caller, are you there?
Hi, yes, I am. Okay, so my question is this. When you're living in a rental unit, is it possible for you to investigate whether or not your building is in foreclosure, if it's in good standing, or you're always just going to be caught off guard if you do find that it's in foreclosure and you have to move?
Right, that is an excellent question, and I would encourage all renters to look into their building, see if it's in foreclosure, see, like you said, if it's in good standing, and let me, I am going to provide you with that information here. So there are some online resources to research if the building's in foreclosure. And what you do is start off with the Cook County Assessor's Office website. The web address is listed there. You simply put in the address in question, and what you're looking for is the property identification number, or the PIN number. With that PIN number, you can then go to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds Office website. Again, the web address is listed there. And what you're looking for is what's called a lis pendens, which is a pending lawsuit. And it'll specifically say, if it was filed after, I believe, 2011, it'll specifically say lis pendens foreclosure. And you want to click on the document number there and look for the case number. And with the case number, which will be, it'll have a year and then a CH and then numbers after that. With that case number, you can go to the Cook County Clerk of the Circuit Court website and use that case number to pull the foreclosure-related information. And if you have any trouble doing that, the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing also conducts foreclosure counselings. So we do one-on-one counselings over the phone. You can call our office. I'll provide you with our number as well. And we can walk you through the process step by step over the phone as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome.
So going back to the formulation of the coalition, we got together and we start working on the draft ordinance. And the purpose of the ordinance was to protect tenants living in these foreclosed buildings and to prevent more properties from becoming vacant.
Right, definitely. Because as Diane and I know, and perhaps a lot of renters out there know, it's not just, this doesn't just impact households and single renters. This has a community-wide impact when a building goes into foreclosure, and if it becomes vacant, there's increases in crime rates.
Exactly.
The building deteriorates sometimes beyond repair. And it's also a city-wide issue because, a couple of years ago, the city was really footing the bill on a lot of these properties.
Right.
So,
and it brings down the values of adjacent properties when you have an empty, vacant building on your block.
Definitely. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about the ordinance. So the ordinance is called the Protecting Tenants in Foreclosed Rental Property Ordinance, or more commonly known as the Keep Chicago Renting Ordinance. And what that ordinance does is incentivize owners who purchase a property at foreclosure auction to keep buildings occupied instead of vacating them and engaging in some of the practices that Diane spoke about previously. So Diane, if you want to go into a little bit about when the ordinance was passed, when
Sure.
it goes into effect.
Right. The ordinance was passed on June 5th of this year with 45 aldermen signing on in support. That's a great
tremendous support.
45 out of
Right.
50, which was a huge victory for the coalition. The ordinance went into effect on September 24th of this year. So, and really, Chicago is the second largest city in the country to have these protections for renters in foreclosed buildings.
Right. So what that means, the ordinance went into effect on September 24th. So renters who are in foreclosed properties where the foreclosure has completed before that date, they are unfortunately not covered by this ordinance. But renters who are living in foreclosed properties where the foreclosure has not yet concluded or has concluded after September 24th, they are covered by this ordinance. So I just want to cover a little bit of the basics here. So foreclosure, the process itself is pretty lengthy in Illinois. We are a judicial foreclosure state, meaning that foreclosures happen through the court. And right now, I believe on average, it's taking about 1.5 years for those foreclosures to conclude. At the end of the foreclosure, there's a sale, and that sale has to be confirmed by the court for it to be finalized. Once the foreclosure is finalized, tenants should be notified that there is a new ownership, that someone has purchased the property and there's a new landlord. And that notice needs to provide the tenant with contact information for who's going to be responsible for the property now, who's managing the property. And it should, under the new ordinance, also say where you can pay your rent. Mm-hmm. Some other basics of the ordinance are tenants who are qualified, and most tenants are qualified under the ordinance, so that's a person who is not the child, spouse, or parent of the former owner, and who's not paying substantially less than market rate. Tenants with housing choice vouchers and other subsidies are included and protected under the ordinance as well. So the new owner has to continue renting to the tenant by either honoring existing leases or renewing or extending leases that are already in place. And they have to continue doing so until they sell it to a third-party purchaser. And also the rent that under a renewed lease cannot be more than a 2% increase from the rent that the tenant was previously paying. If the new owner chooses not to continue renting to the tenant, they would have to pay relocation assistance to the household that they are asking to vacate of $10,600, which is a very substantial amount of relocation assistance.
It is, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the ordinance also covers people that are renting condominiums and renting single-family homes, correct?
You're right.
Yes,
you're right about that.
Right. So it covers a lot of people that are renting in foreclosed buildings, and again, Trish just talked about the $10,600 relocation fee. This is the owner's choice. It's not the tenant's choice.
Right. That is extremely important. This is not the renter's choice. They can't say, thanks for offering to renew my lease. I don't want to do that. I want to get out of here. I want my $10,600. That is not how it works, unfortunately. It is the purchaser's choice of which option to pursue. And also, tenants need to continue to abide by their leases. They need to continue paying their rent. They need to continue doing everything they signed on to with their original lease to enjoy all of the benefits of this ordinance.
Right.
And we also do have a caller, I believe, so let's take their question or comment. Caller? Hello?
Yes. The best way that I can say this, my question is, why isn't the bank required to inform the tenant that the property that they're living in is in foreclosure?
At the beginning of the foreclosure process?
And please don't hang up because I think I got a follow-up question.
Okay, sure. So at the beginning of the foreclosure process, it's actually the landlord's responsibility to inform the renter.
Okay, stop for a second. If you get a landlord, especially like when the housing boom in 2008, when you had everybody doing these subprime loans and everything, if you had a tenant who was faithfully paying their rent, believing that this landlord is legit and that they're planning to keep the property, not just trying to make money off of it or doing fake loans and whatever off of it, if you have a tenant that is faithful You just said that this new ordinance says that you should keep paying. But my question is, if I know of a personal situation where the person was paying their rent, and all of a sudden they get a letter from the bank saying that the property, is in foreclosure. Right. And the landlord or the so-called landlord had collected the rent.
Right. This is what we've been seeing all along. We hear that what you just said, we have heard over and over and over again. This is why we work so hard to get this ordinance passed. Because you're absolutely right. The tenants who are paying their rent and doing everything right, why are they the ones that, get the raw end of the deal? That's why we work so hard to pass this ordinance.
Okay, so why isn't the bank required to, as they pursue foreclosure?
Sure.
Why aren't they required to send a letter to whoever lives in the building? Right. Especially if they know that it's that there's rental property.
Right, and I can hopefully clarify that a little bit. So, like I had mentioned, foreclosure is a very long process, and during that whole, right now, what's a 1.5 year long process, the landlord generally keeps possession of the property, meaning the landlord and the tenant have all the same rights and responsibilities as they would have if the building were not in foreclosure. The bank doesn't have any right to intervene in the property or the new owner until after the foreclosure concludes with the confirmation of sale, unless the landlord does something that's very negligent. If there's maintenance problems, a receiver can be appointed to take over management of the property. But if that's not the case, the landlord is still the landlord, and they are required under the RLTO, the Residential Landlord Tenant Ordinance, to inform renters that the building's in foreclosure, although we didn't often see that. As Diane had mentioned, there's a lot of problems. And there is a lot of confusion regarding foreclosure, and that's why we really wanted to bring about this new ordinance that would offer protections once the foreclosure concludes. It doesn't have any effect on what's going on during the foreclosure process. But thank you for your question, and I'm sorry, we do have another caller that I would like to get to.
Your time.
Thank you. Hi, caller. Are you there?
Yes.
Hi, do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I want to clarify exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. My landlord just told me that the building where I'm renting from is in foreclosure.
Okay.
Should I and do I still have to pay him rent?
All right, Diane, you want to?
Yes. So, yes, you do have to keep paying rent, and that's very, very important. You have to keep paying the landlord rent till you get a notice that says that he's no longer the owner. We've had some cases where the landlord is missing in action, so you don't know who to pay the rent to. Our advice to you is to put that rent money on the side, hold it, because he might come back and demand that rent, or it could be held against you when the new owner takes possession. So please continue to pay rent to the landlord and continue to pay rent when you get the notice on the new owner and where to send the rent when the new owner takes over the building.
Right.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. And again, just to reiterate, all the same rights and responsibilities that tenants and landlords have still apply throughout the foreclosure process. And once the foreclosure concludes and you're notified about a new owner, that's your new landlord. And you're establishing a new landlord-tenant relationship, and they should direct you as to where to pay your rent going forward and who's going to be responsible for maintaining the property. Mm-hmm. So I just want to, again, give the instructions or resources for looking up if your building's in foreclosure, because it seems to be, there is a lot of confusion out there. How do I find out if my building's in foreclosure? How do I know what phase of the process it's in? So again, please review these websites, and if you want to research your building, these are some good resources for doing that. The Lawyers Committee for Better Housing also, again, does foreclosure counselings with renters. It's really important to be informed about the status of your building. So we went over some of the basics of this new ordinance. what is the follow-up? Diane, what is Albany Park Neighborhood Council doing to monitor the ordinance and its effectiveness?
Right. So before the ordinance was passed, the Albany Park Neighborhood Council put together an outreach program called Renters Empowering Neighbors Together. And what we did, volunteers like myself and the housing team would go out and actually door knock these properties that recently went in foreclosure. We received a list of these, the addresses of these properties from the Lawyers Committee on Better Housing, and we talked one-on-one to these renters, informing them of their rights. Well then, once the ordinance was passed, our focus changed a little, because now we go out and door knock and talk to the tenants about their rights under the ordinance. So what we're finding out is that the banks are complying to the ordinance, which is, we're very excited to see that.
Excellent news.
Notices are given out, proper notices in languages that the ordinance requires. And one story we door knocked to one family, and this lady was telling us that a year ago, where she was renting from, the house, the building that she was renting in at that time, went into foreclosure, and her and her family were displaced. So when she found out that she is covered by this ordinance, knowing that her building that she's living in now was going into foreclosure, she was so excited. And then all of us that worked on this ordinance for many, many years, to see the result of the ordinance working was very, very exciting for all of us. So, and we're going to meet very shortly with people from the city to make sure that make sure that all the requirements that had to be posted or had to be recorded are being done so.
Great.
And to make sure that the ordinance is working in the way we intended it to work.
Right. That is excellent news. And like Diane mentioned, we had worked on this for such a long time. It was a huge victory for Chicago renters. And this is a topic that I get very excited about, and I know Diane does too. And I just want to share with people some information here. If you want some follow-up, actually we'll touch on these briefly. So for upcoming episodes, we'll be talking about building conditions and utility shutoffs and healthy homes initiatives with the Metropolitan Tenants Organization. So tune in for those. Those are also really great topics, and you'll be able to learn a lot more about renters' rights. But if you have questions about what today's show was about renters in foreclosure, the Keep Chicago Renting Coalition, you can direct that to the Albany Park Neighborhood Council. Their number is listed there, 773-583-1387.
And if I could say,
Sure.
if anybody is interested in becoming involved in some of the issues that the Albany Park Neighborhood Council is involved in, feel free to call that number also. We're always looking for new volunteers. In fact, a lot of our new volunteers came from our door knocking, talking to tenants of these buildings, and to prevent this from happening to somebody else, they volunteer now and they are on our housing team.
That's wonderful news. Well, that's really great. Again, if you do have questions for Diane or Albany Park Neighborhood Council, please call that number. If you have legal questions, if you're, for instance, being evicted, give LCBH a call. Our number for that matter would be 312-784-3527. If you believe your building's in foreclosure, or if you just want to know if it's in foreclosure, what the status is, this is our counseling number, which I had spoken about earlier, which is 312-784-3507. Or if you have a question about other legal issues or housing matters, give us a call at 312-347-7600.
And I agree. So if you're a tenant living in a foreclosed building and you receive a notice that you think is suspect, or maybe somebody is telling you something that you don't think is right, again, don't sign anything. Feel free, give Lawyers Committee for Better Housing a call and make sure that the decision that you make on if you want to leave or not is based on the all of the rights that you know about that the ordinance puts forth.
Right.
So feel free to call Lawyers Committee for Better Housing if you have any questions, or the Albany Park Neighborhood Council. But
Definitely.
remember, pay your rent, pay your rent, pay your rent, because you don't want anything to happen, that the banks or the new owner could use against you.
Right. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.